The morning after the party, the cake box was still on the counter. A plastic fork leaned against a dried smear of frosting, and one of the balloons had deflated in the sink. It all looked like evidence of something cheerful that hadn't quite finished being celebrated, like joy had left the room before the guests did. Howard sat at the table in his slippers, circling the newspaper crossword with a pen that didn't work unless you pressed hard. "We never really got to talk to them," I said. He looked up. "Who?" "Nathan. Caleb. They came, they smiled, but it felt like they were visiting a waiting room." Howard tapped the edge of the paper. "You want to visit them today?" "Number not visit." I hesitated. "I was thinking, maybe we stay with them a little. Take turns, just be around. See what their lives look like up close now." Howard folded the paper in half and set it aside. "Like a little family rotation?" "Not forever," I said quickly. "Just until we've all had a chance to slow down, connect again. We miss so much while working, and now we finally have time." He nodded slowly. "I'd like that." "Good," I smiled. "Then let's ask." That evening, we invited them both for tea. I made the lemon loaf Caleb used to love when he was 16, before Lacey told him sugar was suburban poison. Nathan came with a bottle of wine he forgot to open. Vivian complimented the wallpaper like she'd been paid to do it. We sat on the back patio as the sun disappeared between our neighbors' hedges. I made the offer gently, like handing someone a letter I wasn't sure they wanted to open. Howard backed me up. "Just a few weeks. First Nathan's, then Caleb's. We'd love to be around you more. We're not getting any younger." There was a pause. It wasn't long, maybe 2 seconds, but something in those 2 seconds shifted. It was like someone had dropped a pane of glass between us and them. Caleb blinked. Nathan coughed into his sleeve. Lacey smiled politely, and Vivian excused herself to take a quick call. "We'll be right back," Caleb said, standing too quickly and knocking over a teaspoon. From the kitchen window, I saw them gather near the back fence just out of earshot. It wasn't a discussion. It was a strategy meeting. Vivian had that narrow-eyed look she wore when she negotiated refunds at department stores. Lacey was nodding, arms folded. Nathan gestured once, sharply toward our patio. Caleb looked like a man who wanted to say no, but needed someone else to say it first. I couldn't hear a word, but I understood everything. 5 minutes later, they returned with soft smiles and bright faces. The same expressions they used when they wanted to return a Christmas gift without hurting our feelings. Nathan cleared his throat. "We had a thought." "Of course," I said, already tightening. "We think it might be best if, well, instead of you both staying in one place, we divide it evenly." "Divide?" Howard asked. "Yes," Caleb jumped in. "You'll go with us, Dad. Mom can stay with Nathan and Viv. That way it's fair. No one gets overwhelmed." My teacup didn't rattle, but only because I gripped it too tightly to let it. "Separate?" I asked. "You want us in separate houses?" Vivian smiled like it was obvious. "Just for a little while, it'll be easier, and you'll both get quality time." Howard looked at me. Not confusion, not quite. More like watching a room fill with smoke before anyone admitted there was a fire. We'd never spent more than 2 days apart, not in 5 decades. I searched for something gracious to say, something that wouldn't betray the twist in my chest. "All right," I said. I shouldn't have. We finished tea. They hugged us. They said they were so glad we asked. After they left, I stood in the hallway looking at our photo on the wall, the one from our 35th anniversary. We were younger, tighter, still whole. Howard came up behind me and whispered, "We'll make the most of it." I nodded, but something had already been split, and it wasn't just the living arrangements. The morning light at Nathan and Vivian's house came in sideways through gauzy curtains that looked too expensive to touch. It wasn't home. That was the first thing I noticed. No kettle whistle, no Howard humming as he shuffled past the sink. No 2 cups of tea waiting, just the right amount of sugar in mine. Instead, there was a silent hallway and polished floors that muffled my footsteps. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender spray and new carpet, clean, but clinical. I sat at the edge of the bed trying not to wrinkle the comforter. My overnight bag sat still zipped. I hadn't unpacked. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I reached into the side pocket and pulled out Howard's navy blue tie. Every morning for nearly 5 decades, I tied it for him. It wasn't about the knot. It was about the moment. I'd thread it through his collar and smooth the fabric. He'd smile, make a joke about how he should have learned to do it himself by now. Then we'd head off, me to the bank, him to the rail depot. The world always felt a little more manageable once his tie was set. Now, I held it in both hands and wrapped it gently around my fingers like rosary beads. No one had told me how loud mornings could be without someone to share them. A knock at the door. "Mom," Nathan's voice. "Breakfast in 5. I tucked the tie back into my bag, wiped my eyes, more from habit than need, and stepped out into the open-plan kitchen where Vivian stood arranging fruit like it was auditioning for a commercial. "Sleep well?" she asked without turning around. "Fine," I said. "Thank you." Nathan handed me a mug. "We only have oat milk, hope that's okay." "Of course," I smiled. We sat around their sleek island counter. No table, no ceremony. Vivian scrolled on her phone. Nathan sipped espresso from a cup the size of a thimble, and I tried to pretend toast with no butter was normal. On the counter, folded neatly beside a granite candle tray, was the morning newspaper. My fingers moved almost on instinct. I reached for it. Vivian's voice cut in, polite, crisp, and edged like a paper cut. "Don't hog the newspaper, Margaret. Nathan actually works." I froze mid-reach. She didn't say it cruelly. That was the worst part. It wasn't cruel. It was dismissive. A statement tossed out like an old receipt, meant to be ignored, crumpled, discarded. Nathan didn't say anything. He sipped his coffee and kept scrolling. I slowly withdrew my hand. "Of course," I said. The same 2 words I'd used 1,000 times. At work, at home, in stores. Of course, of course, of course. Later I called Howard. He didn't pick up on the first ring, or the second. By the third I heard the familiar shuffle. "Hello, sweetheart," he breathed, soft and slow. I sat in the sunroom whispering like I might disturb the furniture. "How are you?" "They've got the thermostat set to Arctic, but I'm fine," he chuckled. "They feed you?" "A sandwich, pre-packaged, no mustard." I smiled. Then silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you find in comfortable pauses. It was a stretched-out, aching quiet, full of things we didn't want to say. "I miss you. I hate this. This was a mistake." But instead, we asked about weather, about sleep, about how long a few weeks really felt. After we hung up, I stared out at the manicured hedge just beyond the window. Every leaf looked identical, trimmed, neat, lifeless. I thought of the newspaper, of the way my fingers had hovered an inch above it waiting for permission. No one had ever needed to grant me that before. Not when I was Margaret Ellison, senior accountant with keys to the vault. Not when I was Mom, the one who stayed up all night when they were sick. Now I was just the guest who might wrinkle the wrong page. That night, I folded Howard's tie again, a little slower this time. Then I placed it beneath my pillow, like a letter I wasn't yet ready to send. The final straw wasn't loud. It never is, really. Not the slamming of doors or the sharp-tongued insults that echo through memory. No, it was quieter than that. Quieter than Vivienne setting a plate in front of me with 2 boiled eggs, no salt, no toast, and saying, "I assume this is enough?" Quieter than the way she called out, "Nathan's shirts aren't going to iron themselves, Margaret." As if I'd ever offered to do such a thing. It was the silence after. The silence of not being asked what I wanted, of not being expected to want anything at all. I needed air, not just the kind you breathe, the kind that doesn't come with labels or obligations. So I walked. I didn't say goodbye or leave a note. I just took the long coat I hadn't worn in years, tucked my wallet into the inside pocket, and stepped outside while the eggs sat cooling on the counter. The sidewalk was uneven. The breeze was sharper than I remembered. But the act of walking, of choosing direction, felt like swallowing a full breath after weeks of half sighs. 4 blocks down, tucked between a dry cleaner and a floral shop, I saw it. The yellow mug. A corner cafe with wide windows and a crooked chalkboard sign that read, "Today's brew, Ethiopian bold plus empathy." I like that. The idea that a cup of coffee could carry emotion. I stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon, steam, and ground beans hit me like a memory I hadn't made yet. There were students on laptops, an elderly couple playing chess, a mother feeding her toddler bits of banana bread. It was warm, unremarkably human, exactly what I needed. Behind the counter stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair, a pressed apron, and eyes that had seen a lot and judged little. "First time?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but I think I'll be back." He smiled. "Coffee or tea?" "Coffee, black, and—" I glanced toward the shelf of local goods and impulse buys. A small leather-bound notebook caught my eye, the kind with no lines, just open space. "That too." He rang it up. "No charge for the notebook," he said. "Oh no, I insist. I've seen people come in here needing something they didn't expect. Sometimes it's caffeine, sometimes it's space." I looked at his name tag. Junaid. "Thank you, Junaid." He simply nodded and slid me the coffee. I found a corner booth by the window, placed the mug gently on the wooden table, and opened the notebook. For a long moment I stared at the blank page. There was something terrifying about that first line. As if once I began, I'd admit too much, lose control of the story I'd been trying to shrink into politeness. And then I wrote, "The realities of life on grace and disgrace." The pen moved faster than I expected. Words poured out, not elegant, not perfect, but mine. I wrote about boiled eggs and missing toast, about the tie that slept beneath my pillow, about the way a woman can vanish into usefulness and then be erased once it expires. That day, I filled 6 pages. The next day, 8. Every morning became a quiet rebellion. Walk to the cafe. Order the same coffee. Sit in the same booth. Write like the page was the only one listening. Junaid never asked what I was writing, but he always refilled my mug when it reached the halfway mark. Always nodded with a kind of respect most people reserve for those doing something official. Something important. After a week, he brought me a slice of banana bread and said, "Writers forget to eat." I smiled. "I'm not a writer." "Tell that to the notebook," he replied. And maybe he was right. Because by then, the notebook had weight. Not in ounces, in truth, in accumulation. Every sentence I wrote pulled me back into myself. Every sip of coffee reminded me I still had taste. And every word that spilled onto the page was a quiet scream I no longer had to muffle. Howard never said much over the phone. He was a man of soft words and quiet pauses, the kind who let silence carry meaning rather than clutter it with noise. But even without saying it, I could tell from the way he breathed that things at Caleb's house were not what we'd hoped. "They have the thermostat set to Arctic again," he said on the 3rd night. I smiled softly into the receiver. "Layer up." I did. Wore my heavy socks and your old cardigan, the pink one with the little phrase. "Brave of you," I said, trying to sound light. Caleb called it my retirement shawl. There was a pause. Then we both laughed, the kind of laugh you only manage when your dignity's bruised but not broken. Howard had never liked to complain, but I could tell he was shrinking in that house. Caleb's home was all glass and sharp corners, filled with voices that moved too fast and a schedule too tight to make room for someone who moved a little slower. On his first day there, he sat on the living room recliner, not realizing, apparently, that it was Caleb's chair. Lacey had smiled thinly and said, "Oh, that's Caleb's spot, Dad. He decompresses there after work." Howard stood, apologized, sat on the edge of the ottoman like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. He told me all this slowly, without bitterness, like he was still trying to convince himself it was all just a misunderstanding. Just a busy household. Just a temporary inconvenience. But I knew better. We had become furniture they didn't know where to put. I imagined him watching TV with the volume too low, eating meals late so he didn't get in the way, folding his hands while conversations flew around him like flies, all buzz, no attention. I missed him more in those days than I ever had in the 50 years we'd been married. And he was only 20 minutes away. We called each other every night. Short, careful calls. We never said I'm lonely. We never said this hurts. We said things like, "Did you eat today?" And you wouldn't believe how much sugar they put in their sauce. But underneath it all, there was a slow, steady ache, the kind that doesn't scream but lingers behind your ribs. One night, after Vivienne had gone to bed and Nathan was still in his office on another late call, I stepped out into the garden behind the guest room and dialed Howard. The moonlight hit the grass just enough to remind me what quiet used to feel like. "Hi, love," he answered after one ring. "Can't sleep? Can't pretend anymore?" "Same." For a while we didn't talk. We just listened to the sound of each other's breathing. And then, softly, like a secret not meant for the world, I said, "This Sunday, let's just meet." Howard didn't ask where. He didn't ask how. He just said, "I'll bring your tie." And I smiled. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. We weren't planning a rebellion. We were planning a reunion, one nobody had given us permission for. Because permission was never theirs to give. And marriage, I'd learned, wasn't about the vows spoken in church. It was about the quiet promises made between two people across 1,000 breakfasts and 100 wrinkled mornings. I went to bed that night with my coat already hanging on the back of the chair. The next page of my notebook lay blank, but waiting. And somewhere across town, Howard was folding that pink cardigan, not because he needed the warmth, but because it still smelled like home. The morning of our 52nd anniversary arrived without flowers, fanfare, or family. Just the whisper of wind against the window and the soft creak of my coat hanger as I lifted it down from the chair. I didn't bother folding my pajamas. I left the guest bed unmade. Vivienne had a thing about neatness, but I was done pretending to be the polite ghost in her house. I packed one bag, not heavy, just enough clothes for a night, a small notebook, and the tie. Howard was waiting for me at the bus stop on 5th and Linden. He wasn't early. I wasn't late. We arrived like we always had, in rhythm, without announcement. He wore the pink cardigan. The one Lacey had said was too faded for brunch. I didn't hug him right away. We just stood side by side, hands in coat pockets, staring at the empty bench across the street like it held an answer we'd both forgotten how to ask. "Got the tickets?" I asked. He patted his coat pocket. "And snacks. Did you bring your phone?" "Nope." "Good." I dropped mine into the trash can beside us without flinching. The bus arrived at 7:45 a.m. It was nearly empty. Just a college student asleep under headphones and a man in overalls reading a paperback romance. I chose a window seat. Howard slid in beside me. For the first half hour, we said nothing. Just watched the houses blur into fields, then the fields flatten into open sky. With every mile, the noise of the last few weeks faded. The clipped voices, the unspoken disappointments, the small humiliations. All of it melted away, like morning frost under slow sunlight. By the time we reached the coast, the clouds had pulled back just enough to let the sun drip through. Not warm, but kind. We walked past a row of shuttered souvenir shops and a weather-beaten pier. At the edge of the shoreline was a wooden bench overlooking the sea. The paint was peeling, the bolts rusted, but it stood exactly where it had all those years ago. "This is where we met," Howard said. "You were reading The Grapes of Wrath. I asked you what page you were on. And I told you to buy your own copy," I said, smiling. "You did. And then you gave me your number, in pencil. On a napkin. You almost threw it away," I reminded him. "I didn't. Still have it." We sat on the bench in silence, letting the waves speak for us. There were no big speeches, no anniversary gifts, just the air between us, still familiar, still full of something solid. Howard reached into his bag and pulled out a paper cup with 2 tea bags floating inside. "I found a stand by the pier. It's not your drawer blend, but it'll do." I took the cup, sipped slowly, and watched the ocean tug at the horizon like it wanted to carry it away. "We can't go back," I finally said. "Not really." "No," Howard agreed. "But we can go home. And if we can't, then we'll make a new one, just you and me." He nodded, no hesitation. That afternoon, we took the same bus back. Still quiet, still steady. We didn't check messages. We didn't call to explain. We owed no one a timetable anymore. When we stepped through the door of our little house, I smelled dust. The kind that gathers when no one's around to open windows or water the plants. But beneath that, I smelled something else. History, ours. The curtains were half drawn, one slightly torn. The sofa cushions had slouched. The clock in the hallway blinked 12 o'clock like it had given up keeping track. It didn't matter. I dropped my bag on the floor, opened every window, and let the cold spring air rush through the house like a second chance. Howard turned on the kettle. No ceremony, no cake, just the simple peace of being home, together. I didn't notice the notebook was missing until the third day back home. We'd been busy resettling into the rhythms we used to take for granted. I washed the curtains. Howard dusted the windowsills. We rearranged the living room furniture. Not because it needed changing, but because we needed to believe we could still move things around in our lives. That morning, as I reached for the little red leather-bound book I kept by the kettle, I realized it wasn't there. The last time I'd seen it was 3 days earlier, at the Yellow Mug. I'd taken it with me after the anniversary trip, thinking I'd write a few more pages. But the ocean had left me full, and I'd forgotten the notebook on the table next to the sugar jar. I let out a quiet breath, both annoyed at myself and oddly detached. Maybe it was a sign to stop writing. Or maybe I thought the pages didn't need me anymore. Howard peeked his head around the door. "You all right?" "I left the notebook," I said. "At the cafe." He nodded. "Want me to come with you?" "No," I said. "I'll go alone." The walk to the Yellow Mug felt shorter than I remembered. Or maybe my steps had more purpose this time. The spring air had shifted into something warmer, softer, like the world was cautiously beginning to open itself again. When I stepped through the cafe door, the bell overhead jingled with a sound that felt unusually important. June had looked up from behind the counter with a grin that didn't quite match his usual quiet demeanor. "Margaret," he said, "you left behind something that seems to have stirred things up." He nodded toward the corner booth, my corner booth, and sitting there was a woman I didn't recognize. She looked up, stood, and extended a hand. Mid-30s, blazer slightly wrinkled from travel, eyes sharp but kind. "Mrs. Ellison," she said. "I'm Maris Langley. I work in acquisitions at Winterlight Publishing." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" Junid handed me a coffee, no words, no charge, and I sat down slowly across from her. "I was in town visiting family," Maris continued. "Dropped in here for coffee, saw the notebook. Junaid was holding it at the counter, said it was yours. I flipped through, just to see the name, maybe drop it off." She paused, then smiled in a way that told me she was about to say something sincere. The kind of smile you don't put on for show. But I didn't stop reading. Not for an hour. Then I called my office. I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or apologize for my handwriting. Maris opened the notebook to a folded page. "This one, where you described tying your husband's tie. That line, I tied it like a woman lacing her own spine together. That's not just writing, that's truth." I looked down at my coffee. "I didn't write it for anyone. That's why it works," she said. There was a silence between us then. Not awkward, reverent. "You've captured something I think a lot of women feel," Maris continued. "The quiet erasure, the routine humiliations, the grief that doesn't come from death, but from being slowly set aside while still alive." I didn't respond right away. My hands wrapped around the coffee cup, grounding me. "I don't know anything about publishing," I said finally. "You don't need to. I'll walk you through it." "I'm 75. Exactly. For a long time, I'd thought the only place my words would live was inside the margins of a notebook next to a chipped coffee mug. But here was this woman, professional, sharp, barely old enough to remember rotary phones, telling me those same words could live somewhere else. Maris leaned forward. With your permission, I'd like to show this to my team. If you say no, I'll respect it completely. But I think people need to read this. I didn't say yes. Not right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out Howard's tie, the one I hadn't needed since the bus ride. I smoothed the crease with my thumb. Then I looked up and said, "Let's see if the world is still listening." It arrived on a Thursday, tucked inside a thick envelope with Winterlight Publishing printed in soft gray lettering at the corner. There was no bow, no gold seal, just clean paper and a quiet weight. I opened it at the kitchen table where Howard was peeling an orange with the precision of a man trying to keep his hands busy while pretending not to watch. Inside was a check, 6 figures, my name on it, not from a bank I worked for, but from one that wanted to pay me, for words. Howard leaned over, squinting. "Is that real?" "As real as your pension," I said, folding it back into the envelope like it might dissolve if exposed too long to the air. His eyes widened. "I thought they gave small advances, a few thousand, enough to make you feel published, not paid." "They called it competitive bidding," I said, still dazed. "Apparently Maris showed it to a few people. It resonated." He smiled like he didn't know whether to be proud or stunned, probably both. "I wrote it with a dollar store pen," I added. Howard chuckled. "We should frame the pen." Within 48 hours, the phone started ringing. Not the house line. We'd unplugged that months ago. But the old flip phone I kept for emergencies buzzed to life with names I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Anya from NPR's Late Bloomers series. We're from the Morning Bench, a daytime segment focused on senior authors. We'd love to feature you on Women Over Words. It's a podcast for memoir writers." One call came from a literary reviewer in Boston who said, "I just want to shake your hand. Your line about being folded into someone's schedule like laundry. I felt that in my bones." Another woman emailed to say she read the manuscript in one night, then left her husband the next morning. And just like that, the little red notebook that had been born in a cafe corner began circulating as something else entirely. A book. The cover was minimal, off-white, matte, with the title pressed in embossed letters that felt like braille under my fingertips. The Realities of Life on Grace and Disgrace, by Margaret Ellison. It was strange seeing my name there. I had signed thousands of checks in my life, countersigned documents, filled out payroll forms and tax affidavits and pension withdrawals. But this was different. This name wasn't administrative, it was personal, raw, not senior accountant Margaret Ellison, just me. We placed the first copy on the mantel between Howard's railroad retirement plaque and the anniversary photo our sons had forgotten to frame. That night, as we ate dinner, I could feel it glowing behind us, not physically, just spiritually, like a candle we didn't need to light to feel warm. Howard looked at the book, then at me. "They still don't know, do they?" "Who?" I asked, knowing exactly who. "Nathan, Caleb, the wives." "No," I said, "not yet." He leaned back, hands behind his head. "But they're in there." "Every line," I replied. "And between them." He let out a low whistle. "You didn't name names. But if they read it, they'll see themselves," I said. "If they have the courage to look." We didn't say more after that. Just let the evening pass gently, like a page being turned with care. The next morning, the local paper ran a headline: "Former banker becomes breakout author at 75. A grainy photo of me from the cafe, eyes focused, pen midair, sat beside it. By noon, the bookstore downtown had sold out of pre-orders. Maris called to say they were fast-tracking the print run. She laughed and said, "Apparently the world's starving for truth wrapped in grace." Howard made tea. I opened my email and saw a note from a woman in New Zealand. She had 3 daughters, hadn't spoken to them in months. She thanked me for giving her the words she couldn't find herself. "Do you think this will change anything?" Howard asked, handing me the cup. Not for them, I said, staring at the window. But for us? I smiled. Everything already has. I didn't go on any of the morning shows. They called, of course, producers from Sunrise Today, The Hour with Holly, and a dozen others who wanted a smiling 75-year-old with a moving backstory and a soft voice. They all used the same phrase, heartwarming, as if the truth in that notebook had been written with cinnamon and honey. But my story wasn't sweet, it was sharp, clean, undeniable. So I declined. I didn't write it for clapping segments and coffee mugs, I told Maris when she forwarded the latest request. She laughed. You've officially become the most politely elusive guest of the year. I agreed to just one appearance, a quiet literary summit in Vermont, hosted in a converted barn with mismatched chairs and bad lighting. That felt right. Honest. But I wasn't hiding. Not exactly. The book had taken on a life of its own. It spread not through broadcast, but through whispers, from daughter to mother, friend to friend, stranger to stranger. Clips of highlighted passages made the rounds on social media. People posted dog-eared pages beside their coffee mugs and wrote captions like, "I've never underlined so much in my life. My mother cried reading this. I think I just saw myself for the first time." The quote that spread fastest was from the third chapter. A line I had written without thinking, in a rush of memory and restraint. Sometimes the deepest betrayals wear family names. Someone printed it on a background of soft wildflowers and uploaded it as a phone wallpaper. A teacher read it aloud in a viral TikTok, eyes watering halfway through. An influencer used it as her email signature. Meanwhile, our mailbox overflowed. Cards from strangers, letters from women who had never written anything down until now. Some were short. Thank you for writing what I couldn't say. Others were pages long, each sentence a knot of pain unraveling itself. Howard stacked them carefully in a shoebox and labeled it Real People. And then, one afternoon, it happened. The family WhatsApp group, long dormant, more a shared relic than an actual thread, pinged for the first time in nearly a month. Nathan. Mom, did you write this book that's going around? Caleb. The one about families and retirement and all that? Lacey. Everyone at my work is talking about it. You're trending, literally. Vivian. Is this why you disappeared that Sunday? I read the messages once, then again. Howard leaned over, peering at my phone. And so it begins, he muttered, sipping his tea. I didn't respond, not right away. I needed them to sit with the not knowing, the discomfort of being the ones outside the story. But I could imagine their panic. I could see Nathan's eyes scanning the chapters, looking for his name. I could picture Vivienne counting the implications like receipts in a dispute. Caleb would probably try to explain it away. Maybe call it a creative memoir. And Lacey, well, she'd keep the group active just long enough to stay in the loop. They had all been waiting for my usefulness to expire. Now they were realizing that absence doesn't mean silence, and love does not always translate to forgiveness. The woman they had ignored, reduced, and sidelined now sat on bestseller lists next to people with ghostwriters and six-figure promo budgets. And all I had was a notebook, a pen, and enough truth to tip the balance. Later that night, I showed Howard a photo someone had tagged me in. A library display in Minnesota with a hand-lettered sign. Grace and Disgrace. Stories that refuse to be forgotten. Not bad company, he said, patting my knee. Not bad at all. I turned my phone over, letting the screen go dark. There was nothing more to say, at least not in that family thread. They'd read the rest soon enough, the parts where they weren't named but fully seen. And when they did, they'd understand just how loud quiet people can be. Vivian was the first to suggest attending the summit. She brought it up casually, over breakfast, the morning after Margaret's book hit its third bestseller list. A fork in one hand, her phone in the other, voice just light enough to sound supportive. We should go. I mean, it's family. And she's speaking, right? It would look odd if we weren't there. Nathan glanced up from his screen. It might make things worse. You know how she gets when she's being dramatic. Dramatic? Vivian's brow lifted. She wrote an entire book, About us, Nathan. You don't think that's already worse? Across town, Caleb and Lacey were having a nearly identical conversation in the garage while reorganizing their forgotten holiday decorations. She'll forgive, Caleb said, holding a plastic tub labeled Tree Skirt, 2016. She always has. Lacey snapped the lid shut. It's different now. She's still Mom, same Margaret, same guilt circuit. Lacey hesitated, brushing dust from her fingers. Have you actually read the book? Some of it, Caleb replied sheepishly. Just enough to know we're in it. Well, we look horrible. We didn't do anything wrong. Lacey looked at him flatly. We separated two 75-year-olds who had been married for 5 decades, so we wouldn't have to deal with them, and we let your father eat microwave sandwiches on a patio folding chair. Caleb rubbed his temples. So what do you want me to do? Apologize, she said. But do it carefully. She's famous now. There's press. Eyes. Meanwhile, in a private group chat titled Summit Game Plan, the 4 of them coordinated everything from what to wear to what to say. Vivian insisted on pearls. Respectable, approachable, not too flashy. Lacey suggested they arrive early. We want to be seen supporting, not reacting. Nathan rehearsed lines in the mirror. We're so proud of you, Mom. You've always had a gift and we just didn't see it before. Caleb practiced his version too. You taught us so much, we were just too busy to realize. Nowhere in their planning was there room for discomfort, for ownership, for grief. This wasn't about repair. It was about damage control. The summit would be recorded, photographed, tweeted, and somewhere in the anxious corners of their minds, another concern had begun to form. Quiet, like a draft through an old house. If this book did well, really well, what did that mean for the will? Vivian was the first to say it aloud, late at night, while Nathan was brushing his teeth. She's got money now. She always had some, the house, the savings. No, Nathan, this is different. She's relevant now. Powerful, and she has a voice. He turned off the tap, drying his hands slowly. You think she'd cut us off? I think she's not afraid to write us off. That's step 1. The truth was, the book's success had changed everything. Margaret was no longer the quiet woman in a cardigan reading the paper too long at breakfast. She was being quoted in editorials. Her face had appeared in a magazine spread titled Late Life Luminaries, Women Who Rose After Silence. To them, that wasn't just unusual. It was dangerous. Because when people like Margaret start being listened to, the people who spent years dismissing them suddenly realize they've built their castles on sand. The plan to reconcile wasn't born from guilt. It was born from fear. Fear that her story would keep going. Fear that she would gain influence. And above all, fear that she finally understood her own worth. They told themselves it was about healing and support. But underneath the polished intentions and rehearsed affection, the truth was simple. They missed the version of their mother who stayed quiet, the one who folded napkins and ironed shirts, the one who said, "Of course," and smiled through insult. But that woman had put down her ironing board and picked up a pen. The barn had been converted into a venue with just enough effort to feel official. Rows of folding chairs, string lights drooping from overhead beams, and a lectern that looked like it had once served lemonade in a church parking lot. I wore the blue dress Howard liked. Simple, soft at the sleeves. Not elegant, not flashy, just clean, honest. Maris had offered to hire a stylist. I declined. I'm not being packaged, I told her. I'm being heard. Howard sat in the second row, 2 seats from the aisle, holding a copy of the book like it was made of glass. The crowd was smaller than I imagined it would be, but full, mostly women. A few men, gray hair, young eyes, a scattering of journalists with badges and notepads, waiting to spot something quotable. And in the front row, just to the right of the center, Nathan, Caleb, Vivian, Lacey, dressed for sympathy, smiling like they weren't sure if they should. I stepped up to the lectern, gripping the edge with both hands. The mic gave a soft squeak and then settled. I took a breath. I was told to keep this brief, I began, and to keep it light. But I've lived 75 years, and very few of them were light. There was a chuckle in the back, a few nods. I'm not a writer, I continued. Not by profession, not by education. I don't have an MFA or a publisher's pedigree. I wrote this book at a cafe near my son's house because I didn't know where else to put the weight I was carrying. I paused, letting the quiet settle. I wrote it for the women who are always the last to eat, the first to sacrifice, the ones who shrink themselves to fit into other people's plans, and then get told they're lucky to be included at all. No one moved. I scanned the crowd but didn't lock eyes with anyone, especially not the front row. I didn't write this story to expose anyone. I wrote it to reveal something about what happens when loyalty is mistaken for silence, when care becomes currency, and when women forget that their lives, their whole lives, are not footnotes to someone else's. I could feel the air shift, the kind of collective inhale that means someone's heart is cracking open. I looked down for a moment, then back up. I don't need to name names. If the words fit, they fit. A few hands covered mouths. One woman let out a quiet, mm-hmm. Vivian stiffened. Lacey glanced sideways, blinking too quickly. I closed the book in front of me. I hadn't read from it, I didn't need to. The truth was already out. I didn't come here to be celebrated, I said. I came here to remind you, and myself, that it's never too late to tell the truth. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if the ones who hurt you are sitting in the front row. Silence. Then someone stood, then another, and another. The crowd rose like a tide. Quiet, strong, unwavering, no whoops, no cheers. Just the sound of hands meeting in reverent applause. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, but I didn't look at them. I looked at Howard. He gave me the smallest nod, one he'd given me hundreds of times before. Proud, steady, home. And just over his shoulder my son sat in silence, smiling, but no longer sure how to pretend. Backstage smelled like cold coffee, makeup powder, and the nervous pacing of people who'd said too much or not enough. A folding chair waited in the corner, draped with a shawl I didn't recognize. Someone had left a half-eaten granola bar beside a stack of complimentary tote bags. I sat down, smoothing the skirt of my blue dress, letting the applause echo through the wood-beamed walls like distant thunder. Somewhere out front, Howard was waiting. I imagined he was doing what he always did after something big, looking for a quiet place to make sense of it. But before I could gather my breath, I heard them. "Mom." Nathan's voice came first. I turned just as he crossed the curtain, moving with too much urgency for someone offering congratulations. His arms wrapped around me before I had time to respond. The hug was tight. Too tight, like he was trying to squeeze something out of me, or back into me. "You were incredible," he said. "Really. Powerful. Honest. Just..." He pulled back, searching my face. "We're proud of you." Caleb followed behind with Lacey a step beside him, eyes already glossed over. She dabbed at the corner of one with a tissue, the way women do when they want emotion to look manageable. "We didn't know how to handle everything," she said softly. "Your retirement, the transition. We thought we were helping." Vivian hovered near the doorway, arms crossed in a way that looked folded but not closed. Nathan stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "Mom, if you needed space, you could have just told us. You didn't have to..." He gestured vaguely. "Go public." I looked at him, really looked at him. The tailored suit, the careful phrasing, the hope in his eyes. Not for reconciliation, but for relevance. They weren't here for healing. They were here for proximity. To the book. To the applause. To the narrative they had been cut out of, and now wanted back in. "You said I could stay with you for a few weeks," I said evenly. Nathan nodded slowly, wary. "We thought it was fair. You separated me from your father." Silence. No therapist would call that fair. Lacey stepped in, eyes flicking toward a journalist lingering near the exit. "We've talked about this, Margaret. We made a mistake. But you wrote it down. All of it. Now everyone sees us like what we were, I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. A woman with a press badge and a notepad approached the edge of the curtain. Mid-30s, neutral blazer, eyes sharp. Mrs. Ellison? She asked. Can I ask you just one question? I nodded slowly. If that family in your book were yours, she said gently, what would you do? The room stilled. Nathan's smile faltered. Caleb looked down. Vivian finally blinked. I adjusted my shawl, took a breath, and answered with no hesitation. I'd leave them in the past, I said, where they put me. The reporter's pen didn't move for a moment. She was too stunned to write. Then she nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and stepped away. None of them spoke after that. They simply stood there, 4 people in polished shoes, standing in the echo of a truth that wasn't up for negotiation. Howard appeared beside me, gently touching my elbow. Ready to go? I nodded. As we walked out into the cool Vermont air, hand in hand, the applause long faded, I felt no triumph, no vengeance, just clarity. They came to stake a claim, but I wasn't theirs to claim anymore. The morning after the summit felt unusually still. No interviews, no email pings, no clinking dishes from a breakfast tray I didn't ask for. Just our home, sun pooling gently through the lace curtains, the kettle hissing softly in the kitchen, and the quiet pulse of peace returning. Howard stood at the hallway mirror, holding his navy blue tie in both hands, fingers fumbling with a loop that never quite came together. I think I've forgotten how, he said with a crooked grin. I walked over, brushing his hands aside gently. Let's do it together. We stood face to face like we had hundreds of mornings before, except this time, he placed one hand on my shoulder, grounding me, while I folded the fabric like memory. He still leaned in slightly, just like he used to, not because he had to, but because it brought us closer. As I pulled the final knot into place, he looked at me through the mirror. Perfect, he said. It wasn't. It was slightly off-center, the fabric creased where it shouldn't have been. But the tie wasn't about symmetry. It was about us, and the rituals no one ever noticed until they were gone. I turned toward the kitchen table, where today's newspaper had been placed beside my tea, folded neatly, without fuss. The front page headline read, "Truth on Her Terms, Margaret Ellison's story rewrites the ending." Beneath it, a photo taken just after the speech, me at the lectern, one hand on the book, the other steady on the mic, not smiling, just certain. I studied the image for a long time, the same way I used to study my bank statements, with quiet precision and a touch of disbelief. Taped to the edge of the front page was a small yellow post-it, Howard's handwriting unmistakable in its slanted patience. Don't let anyone take this from you again. I ran my fingers over the note, not to smooth it, but to feel it. To remind myself that the power wasn't in the page, or the headline, or even the speech. It was in the living room. The getting back up. The walking out of someone's version of your life and writing your own instead. Howard returned from the hallway, still adjusting his tie. You going to keep that one? He asked, nodding toward the paper. I folded it, neatly this time. Yes, I said, and the note too. We sat down together at the table, same chairs, same mugs, but nothing was the same. And for once, that was a gift. The room was brighter than the barn in Vermont, all soft whites and high ceilings, with rows of women in every shade of gray, gold, and fire. Some held notebooks, some tissues, some just held each other's hands. The Women's Authors Conference wasn't glamorous. It didn't need to be. It pulsed with something older than applause, something deeper than fame. It pulsed with recognition. When I was introduced, they read from the back of the book jacket, but not the part about sales or bestsellers. They quoted the second line I'd written in my very first notebook. The first grief a woman survives is forgetting she mattered. I stood and walked slowly to the podium. The lights above me were soft, gentle, like they knew how to light someone who'd been told to stay in the background. My speech wasn't long. I didn't need it to be. I said I hadn't meant to become anything more than a woman with a pen and a little too much heartache. I said I hadn't lost a family. I had found myself. And that was the truth. The sharp, hard, beautiful truth. When I finished, the room stood, not all at once, but like a slow wave rising from the center outward. No shouting, no thunderclaps, just people standing for a woman they saw, maybe even for the woman they used to be. Later, in the signing hall, they brought books to my table with post-it notes already stuck on the page that had changed them. A woman with silver braids leaned in and whispered, "I read this to my daughter." Then I told her about my mother. We cried. Another, no older than 25, held her book tight and said, "I didn't know what was happening to my grandmother until I read this." I signed every copy slowly, with care. And on one of them, a plain paperback handed to me by a woman who looked like she hadn't spoken her truth yet, I paused and wrote, "To the next woman who thought she had no story." It was at that conference that I announced the donation. Half the book's proceeds to fund a national trust for elder women's legal aid. I didn't say it to look generous. I said it because I meant it, because the women in that room didn't need charity. They needed defense. They needed the same thing I'd found in a corner cafe with a notebook and a warm cup of coffee: the space to be believed. My face would later appear on a banner that hung over the conference website with the words, "Not a rebel, a witness." And that felt right, because this wasn't revenge. It was remembrance. The taxi dropped me at the corner. I asked the driver not to pull into the driveway. I wanted the last few steps to be mine. Alone. Quiet. Homecoming on my own terms. It was early evening, the kind of dusky, gold-tipped light that makes even the weeds look like something worth keeping. Howard had left the porch light on, but something else waited by the front gate. A box, medium-sized, wrapped in thin white ribbon, sitting neatly on the stoop like a student waiting for permission to speak. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what was inside. Apology gifts, probably a photo album, a scented candle, maybe a card signed with words like healing, moving forward, or starting fresh. I stood there for a moment, one hand still on the latch. Not angry, not wounded, just done. Then I lifted the box, gently, like it might shatter, and placed it just outside the gate, on the sidewalk, where it belonged. I didn't need to punish them. I just didn't need to carry them anymore. Inside, the house was still. Howard appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, apron on, sleeves rolled, holding two mismatched mugs. "Coffee? Please." We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Our silences were not voids. They were shelter. I sat at the table, the one we'd returned to so many times now, and reached for the drawer where I kept my pens. From my bag, I pulled a new notebook. Plain brown cover, unlined pages, just like the first. I opened to the first page, paused, and breathed. This wasn't a sequel. It wasn't for an audience, it was for me. To remember that the story I just told wasn't the end of anything. It was the clearing of ground, the laying of foundation, the start of a life I hadn't known I could still live. Howard poured the coffee. The room smelled like home. I picked up my pen and wrote the first words. Steady, slow, mine. Love built me. Silence refined me. Truth saved me. And then, I closed the door. If this story reaches you, let me know where you are in the world. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far my story has reached. Consider subscribing us to become a part of our strong but resilient community.